Hi, all, and thank you for joining me for another episode of Love Dripping from the Walls. I am your host, Elizabeth Cunningham, and the topic that we are discussing today is part of the happiness series that I have been doing with Dr. Justin Blaney. This is happiness part 3 of 4, so there's one more after this. And what we talked about on part 1 and 2 is a little bit more of the concepts of happiness, history of human behavior, and that sort of thing. And what we're talking about in parts 3 and 4 is the actual actionable what are we doing in our daily lives and bringing it into this year 2020, which has been an interesting year to say the very least. And what are we doing in our daily lives to keep love alive, so to speak? We often hear people say, come from love, make sure that you act from love. Really, love is the answer. But what does that actually mean? And what actions can we take? And how can we behave in a way that aligns with and actually has that show up in real life? So that is what we are talking about today. If you would like to continue listening, please do. If that's not a topic for you, go ahead and move on. A couple orders of business before we get into our episode today. First of all, I am really excited to announce that I have opened up some one-on-one coaching slots in my business. And if you would like to speak with me more about being a one-on-one coaching client in my love coaching business, I would love to talk to you about that as well. So go ahead and click in the show notes. There is a link. It says one-on-one coaching, and you can schedule a free discovery call with me to see how we can expand the love in your life and if working with me is a good fit. Along with those other orders of business, if you want to support this podcast, please go ahead. Again, in the show notes, there's a way to support this podcast. You can also follow me on Instagram and Facebook, and you can go ahead and like and subscribe or rate and review, depending on what platform you are listening on, so that way you can continue receiving all of the doses of love dripping from the walls that I continue to give. Thank you so, so much for your support. Thank you for reaching out. Thank you for just being someone who's interested in living a life from love. I truly honor you and cherish you. Last thing is that if you have someone in your life who would benefit from a little bit of dose of love in their life, go ahead and send this podcast along to them. Just hit that share button and send it right along and share the love. All right. Thank you so much, y'all. Thank you for listening. Thank you for loving. And here we go into our episode with myself and Dr. Justin Blaney. Some of the conversations that I've been having inside of this quarantine is that for as much, for lack of a better word, chaos that has ensued inside of this, it's such a good thing that it's happened.
I agree.
Yeah, okay. So I want to hear your thoughts. You say you agree, so what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, do you want to keep the conversation around relationships and love, or?
Oh, okay. Good question. I would love to keep it around love and taking actions around love.
Both for ourselves and others, right? We've talked about.
Yeah. And, I want to actually expand my podcast. You are part of my expansion. This is episode 1, expansion.
Expansion pack.
To have my podcast be a lot more inclusive of just how love shows up in your life, like not just necessarily around love, sex, and relationships, but as I've been saying throughout this quarantine, one of the great things that has happened for me inside of this quarantine is inside of this podcast, which is love dripping from the walls of your life is about your whole life and every single area of your life, not just love, sex, and relationships, right? And so what I want to talk about is that, like, how do we have love dripping from the walls in every single area of our lives, and not just looking at it from an individual standpoint, but looking at it in a relational standpoint, looking at it in a community standpoint, in a societal standpoint, on a global standpoint. You know, how are we taking actions? Because there's this other thing where it's like, you know, there's the I want to come from love, or like, or love is the answer, or, you know, like just act from love. And I want to take that concept, but just have it really be about the actionable part of it. How do you create and generate love dripping from the walls of your life? Right?
Yeah. It's a beautiful topic. I mean, that's why I think we're friends, because we care about these kinds of things.
Yeah.
I mean, I think so. Some of my thoughts on how the quarantine has changed love and I've been very interested to read articles. It's very funny. You know, you read about people are like, we did social distance dating, and then like we finally gave in and like saw each other, and then 4 days later he moved in, you know, or like you just hear these really, I think it's kind of beautiful stories. And I've heard of somebody that was, you know, sending a lot of like nudies to each other and like flirting and stuff and having like Zoom sex, and then they hooked up, and then the in this particular case the girl really started having feelings for him, but he didn't ever have that, you know, in mind, and so it created a lot of tension. But then that's kind of like, well, that happens normally, so I don't know if that one was really due to the quarantine. So I kind of just looking at all these different stories and trying to say like, okay, is there like a trend here, or like you had mentioned, and I've seen it too, where people are splitting up because of it, because they've been spending so much time together, or again, we don't know the reason exactly, but
sure,
things are different now. Friendships have changed. Like my relationships with almost all of my friends have changed in one way or another. And will they change back to the way they were? I don't know. But one thing I do believe is happening is one common thread I've seen through all of this is that there's something about this lockdown that is making us zero in on what's important more.
Yeah.
And so I really think, based on a survey, an unscientific survey of stories and people I've talked to, that the relationships that are forming during this time are not necessarily like more likely to be flash in the pan and then burn out. In fact, I think they're more likely to create lasting relationships, even though in many cases it's super accelerated.
Yeah.
And I think the reason for that is like, let's just take one example. You're on a dating app, and you know, well, you might be looking for the love of your life, but you know that most of the time, you know, you're going to go out on 2-3 dates. You know, maybe you'll have a sleep with someone a couple of times, and then you're like, you know what, we're probably not a good fit, and you kind of move on to the next person, or any number of different you know, a million different scenarios that can play out. And I think what's going on is that those people that we might have matched with, we're just kind of like letting it go. We're not pursuing it. We're not excited to talk to that person, and we don't have the energy to keep things going in this kind of weird environment.
Yeah.
But when we meet someone who we really connect with, it just goes like super fast, because we kind of just know what we want, and when we see it, we see it. And so
Yeah.
to me, I think that it's kind of just added clarity to our minds. It's taken us out of what we've been doing for our entire life up until March 15th, the
Yeah.
way that we've been operating, and just kind of like go in a certain direction. And it's like, stop doing that. You can't do whatever you were doing before. You're going to have to completely readjust your life. And I feel like what's left is like more of who we really are and what we really want. We're like seeing all of our problems and addictions and biases. And that's why you look at this beautiful movement. I hope it's beautiful. I hope it creates a real outcome, is that Black Lives Matters
Yeah.
is on everybody's radars more than ever, because I think our lives were interrupted, and now we're looking at things through a different lens, and we have more ability to know what matters versus getting caught up in going to Costco to buy, giant boxes of cereal. You can't do that anymore. So now you've got to, pay attention to something else, or what other
Right.
people did. So that's like one kind of common thread that I've seen through all the stories. And I really think it'd be too quick to judge to say that just because these relationships are moving really fast means that they're not going to last. I think that many of them probably will last, or at least, as long or longer than a normal good relationship that you would have made in any other time.
Yeah, and I think that the other part of that is that not only are we taking this time to slow down, like that's kind of what what I'm hearing you say is that we're taking this time to slow down because we have to. There's not a lot else for us to do. There's some of us that are still going to work, but not, a majority of us, even if we do have work, a lot of it is from home, right? And so there's this slowdown to hear ourselves and hear our own wants and needs. And that then lends itself to the partners that we pick, right? But
Mm-hmm.
then it's also that this global environment, that's going on right now. We are in the middle of an election year. Like we're in the middle of an election year. We have the Black Lives Movement. We have all these people speaking out about, injustices happening to Black people and people of color. We're in the middle of a global pandemic, like, should we wear a mask? Should we not wear a mask? Which we covered last time for like 30 seconds. We were like, you should wear a mask. Like, what's the matter with
you? Wear the fucking mask. That's the answer to that question.
Wear the fucking mask. Like, what harm is it gonna do? But we have all of this that's coming to light. And since we do have this opportunity to slow down and pay attention to what's going on, then it turns into our conversations that we're having. Like, people are having real in-depth, this is how we feel, this is how the world's going right now, this is how I'd like to see it go, these are the actions I'm taking, inside of it. And we can really assess one another, like talking about like in a partnership standpoint and just beginning to date someone, where you can really assess the type of person that you're speaking with, and if you want to date them a lot quicker, just by virtue of the types of conversations that are happening globally.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, so I completely agree with you, where I think that lends to having stronger bonds with people, stronger connections, a clearer view of who this person is and what you see for the two of you going forward. And also that it would last longer in that. So, and time will tell, right? Like, we have no idea. Like, maybe in 6 months, it's like the great breakup season. Which it won't be, because no one breaks up right before winter. Everybody wants to have,
a cuddle bunny. Yeah. Well, we're gonna have we may have a lot of breakups. We may have a lot of births in 9 months. We'll see.
Oh yeah. Well, I definitely, at the very beginning of this, I'm like, there's gonna be some Corona babies for sure.
Yeah, a major boom.
Yeah, Corona babies.
Hopefully, the breaking up happens before the baby gets made. That's the better order.
Yeah, definitely. Hopefully all the babies being made are inside of, stable and healthy relationships. But
Even if it's a quarantine honey, as long as it's as long as it's a good lasting thing. But yeah, I think I think it's beautiful. I mean, I think that there's a lot of tragedy and sadness mixed in,
hmm
and I think that we can embrace both at the same time.
hmm
I think that's like an important part actually of happiness, if you want to bring this around to happiness,
yeah,
is resolving. I mean, I've been feeling a lot of anxiety in weird ways. I live in Capitol Hill, just a few blocks from Chazzy, like I like to call it, or Chop, or whatever people
the
call it.
chop. It's the
The
chop.
Chop, the
Yeah.
Chaz. I like to call it Chazzy. Uh, and so every day I see, people marching. I hear gunshots. I look out my window at downtown and I see flash bombs going off at night. Like in the city.
hmm
Uh, and and so like being right in the middle of it, like I have a friend over and we're like, oh shit, you better go move your car, park it in my garage just in case someone breaks your window, or just
Right.
like so many things that are, um you know there's that side of it. There's like the
Mhm.
fear side of it. There's the empathy and the sadness side of it, to be waking up to things that I was frankly kind of asleep at the wheel on, injustices that I wasn't paying enough attention to,
Yeah.
because my life was comfortable and it was easy, and I'd be like, yeah, of course I support that and I donate to that. But it wasn't like I was really. I'm kind of ashamed that I just letting this stuff happen without making a ruckus about it.
Yeah.
And so you have that. So you have this sadness, you have fear, um, you have guilt, and you also have positive things like, I love the fact that time is like meaningless now. Like you can just do things whenever you want, and
Yeah.
it's like it all blends together, and it like forces me into the moment, and
Yeah.
it's forced me to evaluate what's important to me. And I met somebody during the quarantine, and it's been amazing. It's been like super fun.
Mhm.
um, and so there's all these things, and so I think what we should be able to do and learn to do and develop within ourselves is the ability to embrace all of these things at the same time, and not feel like one of them needs to exist or dismiss another one. We can be sad and, and acknowledge that we have fear, acknowledge that we have guilt, and be happy and hopeful. We can do all of that at the same time. And I
Yeah.
actually think that we rob ourselves of happiness by trying to like isolate them, or when we're really sad, um, trying to like convince ourselves that there can be no good things happening at the same time, or vice versa. When we're happy, we don't need to ignore the fact, the bad, the sad, the guilty, all of these things, because they're real. And so it's like it's that running from the emotion that really robs us of the happiness. It's not really the emotion itself so much.
Yeah.
It's really the running from the emotion.
Yeah. Yes, completely agree. Where it's it's just part of being human, right? Like, it's part of being human to have emotions and I think that it's a sign of your compassion to feel things like guilt or shame, or because I feel the same things about you know not checking my privilege, as it's you know as the term is, where it's just like not really seeing the being aware of, but not actively doing something. Like, again, and I'm the same way. Like, I donate to Doctors Without Borders, every single month, but it's just like, that's what I'm doing. but it's a pretty passive, it's an important thing to do. It's definitely important to like donate to organizations that you care about that are, you know, doing good things in the world. But, you know, what are we doing on one of the conversations that I love that's happening right now is, what conversations are you having? Right? Like, what are you noticing? Who are you noticing? And how are you using just tiny actions throughout the day and being aware that are going to make the difference for someone, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so
Yeah, it's about speaking up. It's about being
yeah,
more active. It's about finding ways to be more active, and then not just waiting for something to happen. So like right now, we're not talking about school shootings, but
yeah,
we should be. We should. That still matters. It's, you know, we should still be looking to pass legislation, and you know, we shouldn't just wait for something to pop up and then we all of a sudden care about that until the next thing pops up, and then we forget about that, and then we start talking about this, and it's like, no,
yeah.
let's across the board, let's keep making progress on all of these things. Every injustice needs to have progress made on it.
Yeah, definitely. And you know, one of the things that, like working at the domestic violence center, like when I worked at the domestic violence center, I talked a lot about intersectionality, right? And like we always were talking about how does this affect, you know, people of different colors, people of different religions, people of different genders, you know, all of it, right? People of different sexualities. And so we're constantly scoping like, how are we impacting all of these communities? How are these communities intersecting? How are we, you know, and it was always in the forefront of the conversation. But when I left that organization and I started doing, you know, I started working to be on the preventative side of domestic violence. Like I want to work these people out of work, right? And talk about love and like how are we creating healthy and safe relationships. I started talking less about the intersectionality of it. And like that was one of the things that I felt guilt and shame around. I was like, wow, I've really let this conversation slide.
Mm.
Because I think that, you know, as people, like I can't be dedicated to all of these, you know, different topics, right? Like I can't be dedicated,
Right.
you know, like
There's a million, of course. Yeah.
there's a million things that you can be dedicated to. But I think that if we're being aware that we start to look at, you know, how is everything kind of working together, right? So I'm talking about love, sex, relationships, how to take actions inside of love, you know, what are you doing personally in your life and in your relationships and in your community? But I also need to be aware of, you know, what does your community look like? You know, what experiences do you have? Are you, you know, a Black woman? Are you a Latinx? Are you, you know, transgendered? Are you like all of those things, right? Inside of these conversations. And, you know, that's like one of my not learning, like takeaways, there you go. One of my takeaways from from everything that's happening is to really come back to and continue to expand my conversation and how does this affect all different communities? How am I serving all different communities and
Mm-hmm.
making this conversation accessible to as many people as possible,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah, it requires a conscious effort for sure
Yeah.
to get outside of our bubble, and it takes an amazingly conscious effort because
Mhm.
you know, blind spots are one of the biggest things that hold us back, and
Yeah.
they hold us back so much because we don't know they exist by definition.
By the day, yeah, totally.
So
Mhm.
they can be incredibly limiting because you can't even work on them.
Yeah.
You know, so it's about trying to find those blind spots, and I think that comes from exposing yourself to different kinds of people, because other people will help us see those, you know, because to them it's not a blind spot.
Yeah, other people are really great. I mean, if you talk to someone, you can point out their blind spots. You know, you can point out the
Right.
things that they don't see, but they don't see those, right? But you're the same way. Like I'm the same way. Like you could talk to me and be like, "Oh, Elizabeth, I can see like 5 different blind spots from you." And I'm like, "What? Where?"
I know I've been meaning to talk to you about a couple, Elizabeth.
That's why we're friends. Tell me, give me the goods. But yeah, exactly. You're right. And I think the way that I coach people in seeing their blind spots is just asking questions. And I think that one thing that we can do for ourselves to uncover our own blind spots is, what questions are we asking ourselves? Right? So given new information, then what questions are we asking so that we're actively expanding upon that information? And one of the questions that I ask myself and I ask my coaching clients that really, I think, illuminates a lot is, what is the impact of what you're doing or saying? Like, think of all the people that are being impacted by what, like, maybe specifically what you said. You said something. What was the impact on that person? And not just looking from how it made them feel in that moment, but given that person's experience in life, how did that impact them? And you can do that with partners, you can do that with parents, you can do that with people that you've never even met before.
Yeah.
Where it's just like, how am I impacting this person standing right in front of me?
Yeah. No, it's true. Remind me, did we talk about like the importance of turning outward last time?
Outward? I don't think so.
Okay. Because I think, I mean, what you're talking about reminds me of something that I find to be perhaps the most critical aspect of happiness. And that is the spectrum on which we are inwardly or outwardly focused. And what I have found, and research backs this up, and we kind of all just know it inherently, is that our natural state is to turn inward on ourselves and just to think about us. And in any given situation, even in a conversation like this,
right,
our natural way to converse with people is to listen just enough so that we can kind of seem like we're paying attention, but really we're trying to think of what we want to say, and we're waiting for a chance to say what we want to say. And especially when we're arguing with someone, when this person's saying their point, we're really just trying to think of, I can't wait till they stop talking so I can say my point.
right.
Because we think, what the problem in this argument is that you don't understand me.
Yeah.
Right. And so all of these things are inwardly focused. Or another example, I read this article about a woman who, she wrote into a help column and said, is it safe to have my cleaners come to my house still? And the writer like really tore into her, and she's like, what you should be asking is it safe for your cleaners to be coming to your house? Have you been cautious? Are you disinfecting? And I think it just happens in so many different aspects of life. And so what I have found is that if we can, instead of turning inward, if we can turn outward, and it's so simple, but it's so hard to do, and we really have to work hard to build a habit around it. But I find that unlocks happiness. It unlocks self-love, and it unlocks love for others. And love is the source of happiness. Love for ourselves and love for others is a central source of happiness in life.
Yeah.
And I find that we love ourselves more when we turn outward, because we're not so selfishly focused on how everything is affecting us, that we get to really be ourselves and like blossom. And it's a reciprocal cycle. When I love you and I love myself, it builds upon itself and it grows, and it just adds more love and more happiness and more outward facing, more empathy, more listening, rather than saying, oh, you crazy protesters, you dumb fucks, you think breaking a window is going to help your cause? and we yell and we shout and we get on Facebook. Instead, we should say, tell me your story.
Yes.
What's going on in your heart? I have no agenda here other than to listen to you. And, if I can find a way to help, I will, but I know I can listen and like really want to know and not just be waiting for an opportunity to make it about us. And I just find, even though I really believe this and I have been practicing it for a while now, I still catch myself constantly thinking about myself first, like in many, many conversations. How did that come across? Did they, did they understand me the correct way? And how can I correct how they understand me? I should just be thinking, do I understand them? Isn't that, it's just a simple switch and yet so uncommon.
Yes. Well said. I'm just like, yes, exactly, exactly. Yeah, and I think not even like we should be doing that. It's just that we could be doing
Yeah,
that,
that's a good way to put it.
right? Like, what are the possibilities of turning your focus outwards? What can you, because I think on the onset of that inquiry is the tendency to be like, well, then what about me, right? Then it just like the ego turns it right back around and is like,
Yeah.
well, but no, like what, but then what about me? And then I'm just caring about everybody else and I don't get my needs met and blah, 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 all of that stuff.
Yeah.
But I think that, what are the possibilities? Like what I come back with that with is, what are the possibilities of not making it about you?
Yeah. No, you're right. It's an opportunity. I
Mhm.
mean, we can definitely make it through life without really being all that happy. And I think that that's kind of the normal state of things, because evolution isn't all that concerned with our happiness.
I
Happy,
would say
you
that
don't need,
evolution is not concerned with our. I think we did say that on the
yeah,
last podcast. Is like evolution isn't really concerned with our happiness at all.
yeah. Only to the extent that it helps us procreate, survive, and evolve.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of like our more natural path. That's the status quo.
Mm-hmm.
And there's nothing wrong with not being happy and living a miserable life. It's
Mm-hmm.
not immoral,
Sure.
but it's missing out is the way I would look at it.
Yeah.
There's opportunity for so much more.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that without a doubt, we are the most limiting force of happiness in our life.
Oh yeah.
We limit our happiness more than anything else in this universe.
100%.
I mean, we affect our own ability to love. Like I had a friend over last night. We were talking about drinks, and she was describing how she has this best friend, and she's feeling like they're falling in love during this quarantine, and he's not. And they hooked up once, and then they were like, well, we shouldn't do that anymore, we're going to ruin our friendship. But then it turns out that he hasn't been in a relationship for 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
They hang out all the time together. They actually are physically attracted to each other, like having sex. They love hanging out. They do anything for each other. I'm like, that sounds like you guys are in love. You skip the infatuation part because you've known each other for 20 years. But it sounds
Right.
like you have a really wonderful, like if you were married, I would be like, sounds like you guys have a fantastic marriage,
Right.
you know? But then and I don't know this person, but it's an example of what could be, which is in a lot of cases that he is limiting himself. He's taking this opportunity to be in love and happy with this person off the table, maybe because he's afraid, maybe because he doesn't even know what he's looking for. He clearly has a hard time finding it. He's on the dating apps all the time and meeting people and not finding it.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, it's an example of like, again, even if I don't know this person, if you were to take it and say, there's a lot of situations like this in the world where people disqualify themselves from it, from happiness, from love.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, I think turning outward is just a miraculous way to live.
Yeah.
It's shocking to me. It's been shocking to me to see how much happier and how much more love I feel for myself and others
Mm.
when I stop thinking about myself. I think in part it's because like when we think about ourselves, we tend to just focus on like the negative, right? We
Yeah.
think, why don't I have more money? Why is my nose like that? You know?
Are you reading my thoughts?
For some reason, I've met a lot of people that don't like their noses. We don't like our noses, but you know what I mean? Like we think about
Yeah.
all of these negative things about
Mm-hmm.
ourselves. You know, why am I not more in love with the person I'm dating? And I deserve this, and I think that's like the inward focusing. But if we turn outward, all of that kind of goes away, and we can just be free to like, you know, enjoy other people and make people feel good about themselves and help people out, and it's just a lot more fun.
Yeah, well, if you make people feel good about themselves, then that's you making you feel good about yourself, right? Just like, oh wow, I really accomplished something to, in a conversation or today. It's like, oh dang, like I really did contribute, right, to someone. Because I think that, I mean, there's a lot of common conversations, like underlying conversations that people have. And I think one of them is like, what am I doing wrong? Right. And I think that that's like, or like, what's wrong with me?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's one of the ones that you wure pointing to, which is like, why am I not making enough money? Or like, why does my nose look this way? Or like, why can't I just be like this? Like, it's like inside of that conversation, it's like, what's wrong with me? And like, I'm familiar with that conversation. I've definitely had that conversation. But then there's also like, what value am I bringing too?
Mm-hmm.
Right? What value am I bringing in? Instead of what you're speaking to, it's like, instead of being inside of your head of like, what value am I bringing? And usually people aren't asking that question specifically. It's not like, what value am I bringing? It's like, do people care about me? Am I liked? Did I say the right thing? Right? But
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of more in the flavor of like, what value am I bringing?
Mm-hmm.
But when we turn that, like, just focus on the action of the moment, right? Turn outward, like, what's the action of the moment? Like, how can I just be connected with this person? How can I listen to them? How can I make them feel, how can I make them feel valued?
Mm-hmm.
Then
I have an interest. Oh, sorry. Continue.
No, I mean, when you ask the question, like, how can I make them feel valued? Then ultimately, like what you're saying, it comes back to you, then you feel valued.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah. Well, I heard a principle from a book. I read it in a book. Like, one good reason to not lie to people is that when you lie to people, you assume other people lie to you. And if you tell the truth to people, you're far more capable of trusting other people. It's kind of like the same kind of thing. Oh, I was going to give you an example that came up recently. So during the quarantine, I've been teaching classes on Zoom. I teach classes every once in a while at University of Washington. And it was very difficult because these students did not sign up to take classes online. And I didn't sign up to teach online. If we had all signed up to do it online, it probably would have been different because our expectations would have been different. But
totally, yeah.
It was really, really hard to get them to talk. Like, normally the way I teach my classes is we put our laptops down, I sit on the desk, and we'd all just have a conversation and kind of debate. And it's usually I can't get them to shut up.
That's
after
awesome.
I get them going, we have these rich conversations. I was trying to get that going on Zoom, and I just couldn't. And I was like, are they just like watching Netflix? I mean, you can't really tell. I've been watching Netflix. I wasn't actually listening to you. No, I'm just kidding.
got the separate screen up.
Yeah, I got a big screen behind my computer, catching up on some trashy reality TV.
Just occasionally saying something profound and hoping that That it
Every
fits.
once in a while, it's like, what was that? Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Just what you said. So, but I was finding myself getting frustrated and annoyed at them because they weren't talking. And
Uh-huh.
I'd say I'd bring on a guest and I'd be like, hey, anybody have any questions? And just be like silence. And I tried all these different ways to get them engaged. And I would give them a little pep talk. I'd be like, hey, this guest is really special. While they're talking, make sure that you're writing down any questions or thoughts that you have so that, when we get to the end, we can have a nice, rich discussion. No matter what I did, could not get some discussion going.
Hmm.
And I just kept getting annoyed and like frustrated. And I realized I caught myself doing this whole thing, turning inward. I'm thinking about how they're annoying me and making it hard for me. And I am thinking too that they're having a less quality experience as a result.
Mhm.
But it was mostly an inward focused opinion. And if I stay in that, I might start to snap at them, and be like, guys, are you paying attention? Or, and like, again, just making it about me. And
Yeah.
what I should have done and what I transitioned to as soon as I caught myself
Hmm.
is to think about them. How hard must it be to sit there in front of Zoom all day after you've been on Zoom all day for work, or any number of other like outwardly focused, empathetic lines of thought. And then I could approach it and say, hey, at the beginning of class, hey, I know this is really hard. Like, what can I do for you to make this more engaging? Or it's a difference. And when I make it about me, then they're going to perceive that, and then they're going to get annoyed and shut down even more, and then I'm going to get even more annoyed
Right.
and frustrated, and we're going to have a very bad experience. But if I make it about them, then they can open up a little bit more, and then it's easier for me to open, and it creates this positive cycle that reinforces. And it's like when you step back and you look at the two options, and you say, well, which one should I do? Well, it's pretty clear that one
Yeah.
of them is a much more positive option,
Right.
and yet we just do not do that very naturally. So it's about training ourselves, catching it. Don't beat yourself up when you catch yourself doing that, because we all do it. But as soon as you catch it, you make that correction. You go back to being outwardly focused, and then over time, it becomes more and more natural, and you find yourself doing it more often without having to kind of catch yourself and kind of recorrect your line of thinking.
Yeah, and this is all inside of as you're explaining this, all what I am present to is just that these are actions inside of love. Like when people say take actions inside of love, this is exactly what that looks like. You might not be thinking that like, oh, I'm going to take action inside of love. Like you're thinking about like, how am I going to create this environment that I really want to create to enrich my students' experience? But that's the actionable thing that you can do, is to look outward. And I would say that that's inside of love, like love for your students, love for what you teach, the learning
Mm-hmm.
environment that you get to create. And like that's the action that you can take inside of love, you know instead of
Mm-hmm.
instead of being bogged down in like being annoyed or like really hating the experience, or like this is so stupid and I can't wait for Corona to be over, or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Um, yeah.
no, the other thing that I thought of was that I read these like little I don't know, I'm always just like reading little inspirational quotes. That's one of the reasons why I love your app so much. I just
Thank
love
you.
it. Like I mean, like I'm not the only one. There's millions of us who just like eat that shit up.
I do too. I love that stuff. You know where I found some of the coolest quotes really quick was
Yeah.
on the Honest Tea caps.
Yes. The
They're
honest.
actually really good.
They're really good. You know where else too is the what are those the yogi teas? Have you
I don't know that one.
Okay, so there's a yogi tea, and it's just called yogi tea, and on the little like the little individual what is it? Sorry, there's hammering going on outside here. Um, uh, those like little paper things on the tea droplets, right?
Hmm.
Had the best quotes. They're so good. And they're tiny. They're only like 5, words.
I love that. Yeah. But you
Yes.
were talking about you loved quotes.
Yes. And I have a lot of quote books. And one of my quote books is actually it's an AA book, and I'm not in AA, but it's a really great little quote book about just like taking things one day at a time. And
Hmm.
the quote today was about complacency. Like, notice where you're being complacent. And it gave a very short definition of complacency of notice where you're only concerned with being right. This is obviously in my words, but
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
not, verbatim. But notice where you're concerned about being right, and that you think that your opinion is right. But if you take a step back, you can't be right all the time. That's just not even like logistically, that's just unsound.
right. Yes, yeah. That's not logical to assume, right?
Right, exactly. It is not logical to assume that you are right and that your opinion is the right opinion all the time. So, where are you opening yourself up that you're actually wrong?
Right.
And which ties in perfectly to what we're talking about. It's just like, and not even thinking about it in like a I'm right, you're wrong, because that kind of adds that morality to it. But it's like, where am I holding on to my opinion and it's actually holding me back? Right? Like,
Absolutely. Yeah.
you can hold on to the opinion that it's like, this is annoying. These Zoom calls are annoying. They're never going to listen to me in
Yeah.
this platform. Like, you just hold on to that and be totally right about it. But then if you let that go and open
Yeah.
yourself up to the possibility that you're just wrong about that, then
Yeah.
you have you have another action to take.
Yeah. No, I wrote something like that in thinking about the Black Lives Matter movement and how uh, growth is impossible unless we're open to being wrong about something.
Yeah.
Because to grow means that something must change inside you. And if you knew what to change, then you would have,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you would have fixed all your problems, if you knew how to fix them all. So it's like we have to be open to all of these little blind spots that we don't even realize we have.
Mm-hmm.
And like, could I be wrong about that? What about this? Is this something I need to? One thing that really irritates me is when you have like one group of people telling another group of people how, like this group is telling this group how this group should feel their experiences or
Mm-hmm.
interpret what's happening to them. And
Yeah,
it's like
definitely
when this is the
applicable to the
white
Black Lives
people,
Matter movement.
yeah, the
Yep.
white people telling the black people, hey, there's really not that big of a problem. You're over exaggerating it. Here's
Right.
stats that prove XYZ. And this is, again, it's being inwardly focused versus outwardly. It's not saying, would you please tell me your stories so that I can understand what it's like to live life in your shoes? Because how could I understand what it's like to live life in your shoes? I only know how to live life in my shoes. And if you'd like to learn what that's like, you can ask me, but that's not what this conversation's about. This is about me asking you what it's like to be you. And and that doesn't mean that everything that I think or feel is invalid, but we can't start from this place where it's like, I'm going to tell you how you should be feeling and thinking and interpreting all the things that are going on in your world, a world that I know very little about, but I think I know a lot about because I saw, Tucker Carlson on Fox News tell me the truth about, all of
The
this.
quote unquote the truth. Yes.
Yeah. So, where I see it with, like when I'm hanging out with, say, some male friends, and I hear them talk, business people, and I hear them talking about, say, the pay gap or something, or having not enough women as CEOs or in the C-suite, and I hear them and I hear their perspectives, and it just sounds like someone who doesn't really know what it's like to be anything other than what that person has always been. And so I always wanted to say, like, we should really give the people who are experiencing this thing the loudest voice on what it's like, because they're the ones that are experiencing it. And it all comes back to being outwardly focused versus inwardly. It's just trying to seek out what other people are feeling rather than trying to get across what we think.
Yeah, and I think that you bring up a great point as well, is that when you are that, how do I want to say that? I think one of the things that stops people from being outwardly focused, especially we'll just take that scenario of the Black Lives Matter movement, and white people being up in arms about, oh well, that's not what the police are, and you're blowing it out of proportion, and what have you, right? And I think part of it is also that what people hear versus what is being said, again, goes back to that listening, is not what's actually being said, right? Like Black people are like, this is the experience that we have with the police, and white people are not hearing that experience. They're hearing, I'm going to take the police away from you and you're not going to be safe anymore, right? But it's like,
Right.
yeah, that's I mean, they are talking about like defunding the police and all of that, and like, so it's not like that the police wouldn't, that they're not asking for the police to be lessened or like laid down, but
Changed. Yeah.
Changed, that's a good word. Changed in some way. But if you're not even able to hear, if you're just automatically on the defensive about what's being said, and you're not actually listening to that person's point of view, because it's like this competing, like if I say that you're valid, it means that I'm invalid, when that's not actually the case. Your experience is valid because it's your experience. My experience is valid because it's my experience, and it doesn't, lessen the other one. And we have to listen to people when they're like, hey, I'm experiencing oppression, I'm experiencing violence, I see people in my community dying. We have to listen to that. We have to give up this defensiveness, and we really have to listen, which is just not something that we're generally trained to do. It does take a level of consciousness and awareness in order to just listen, much less take action. But we have to start somewhere. I think in all of this, we can't get bogged down with, oh, well, it's going to be difficult or whatever, like, how do we even start?
Yeah.
We just have to start somewhere.
Yeah, it's going to be difficult. Let's kick this down the road for another couple decades. That's just what we need. Yeah, you got to start. We just got to start.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, oh, this is too difficult, so we should just, exactly, leave it off for the next 30 years. It's like, no, what? No.
Gen Zers will take care of it.
Yeah, doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
But I think that this is just, it's so interesting to me, being a person who studies humans and how humans interact with each other, is that you can take these, how people act towards each other on throughout different scales, right? Like the individual level, the family level, the community level, the state, nation, world, whatever level. It's like you just see the same pattern of like, I don't want to hear something that's going to invalidate my opinion. I'm going to get super defensive and not listen, like on an individual, like partnership level that literally just expands all the way up to, our government and the world. And it's fascinating to me. This is like why I do this, right? Just like, it's so fascinating to me, that if we just take how we are being as humans and shift our point of view inside of how we're being as humans, that it can impact how our government is run, how we talk to each other about cultural and societal challenges,
Yeah.
I think that it's like so beautiful in its simplicity in that. But it doesn't, and even though it's simple, it definitely doesn't make it easy.
Right. It's the world that seems to be moving more the opposite direction. because we're so polarized and everybody's just digging in on their points of view and
Mhm.
less willing to listen, it seems.
Yeah.